Welcome to our video on Florida landlord-tenant laws. As a landlord, it's essential to know your rights and responsibilities in order to manage your rental property well. With that in mind, here are some key aspects of landlord-tenant laws in the Sunshine State. The lease agreement is the foundation of the landlord-tenant relationship. It's a legally binding contract that sets the terms and conditions for the rental property. The most common type of lease agreement is a fixed-term lease, usually for a one-year term, that terminates at the end of the lease term. This is often referred to as a standard lease agreement.
In addition to the terms of the lease, Florida has some additional terms and disclosures that must be included in the lease agreement. Florida landlords must provide tenants with the name and contact information of the landlord or other authorized agents. In addition, Florida landlords must include a specific radon disclosure in their lease agreement. Next, for buildings over 3 stories, landlords must notify renters of available fire protection. Finally, Florida landlords that collect a security deposit must include a security deposit disclosure in the lease agreement and provide tenants with a security deposit receipt within 30 days of receiving the deposit.
Next, let's talk about key landlord-tenant laws. In Florida, landlord-tenant laws are governed by the Florida Residential Landlord and Tenant Act. In Florida, there are no limits on the amount of the security deposit as long as it's reasonable. At the end of the tenancy, the security deposit must be returned within 15 days of the tenant vacating the property if there are no deductions. If the landlord plans to withhold some of the security deposit, the tenant must be provided written notice within 30 days of vacating the property. To enter the property for non-emergency reasons, landlords must provide reasonable notice, usually 24 hours, and only enter during reasonable hours, which are generally considered 7:30 a.m. to 8 p.m. Florida landlords can charge late fees for overdue rent, but these must be reasonable and outlined in the lease agreement. Florida landlords may require tenants to get renters insurance. This is something landlords should always encourage tenants to do. Landlords can charge a fee for return checks. The maximum amount for a return check fee varies based on the face value of the return payment and is $25 for checks of $50 or less, $30 for checks over $50 but less than $300, and $40 or 5% of the face value for checks over $300. Finally, it's important that landlords are familiar with lease termination and renewal laws. Fixed-term leases usually terminate at the end of the lease term unless otherwise stated in the lease agreement. Florida month-to-month leases can be terminated by either party with 15 days' notice. Florida law does not impose a limit on how much a landlord can increase the rent. However, the lease should specify the procedures and notice requirements for rent increases. Florida law requires landlords to maintain the rental property in a habitable condition. This includes ensuring that essential services like plumbing, heating, and electricity are functioning correctly. Tenants must promptly notify landlords of any necessary repairs. Tenants in Florida have specific rights, including the right to withhold rent if the landlord fails to make essential repairs within a reasonable time. Retaliation by the landlord against tenants is strictly prohibited. If a tenant fails to pay rent or violates the lease agreement, the landlord may initiate the eviction process. The process must adhere strictly to Florida law, and the landlord cannot resort to self-help eviction methods, such as changing locks or shutting off utilities.
Congratulations! You're now familiar with key lease laws and you're ready to create your Florida lease. And remember, our Florida lease automatically includes all required disclosures and gives you state assist tips throughout each step of the process. Before you turn over possession of your rental, always make sure that you've screened all tenants, you have an executed Florida lease agreement in place, and you've collected the entire security deposit and first month's rent. And as you manage your rental, remember we have over 400 property management forms, including Florida state-specific forms. These cover every phase of the landlord life cycle, from a Florida Landlord-Tenant brochure to a 3-day notice to pay rent. Visit easylandlordforms.com to start your tenant screening, create a Florida lease agreement that's guaranteed to comply with all Florida lease laws, and access Florida property management forms.